Do it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're recording. So, Nell Frizzell, author of The Panic Years. Hello. Have you got a book, by the way,
Hi.
to do a little?
Hi, Michelle Thomas, author of Therapist and Other
Oh,
Stories.
this whole thing. That's the
Um,
that's the thumbnail.
that thing. Can I tell you a weird story about this? Just to
Please.
interrupt your introduction.
No, do it.
This is a signed copy that my partner bought off the internet to show support when we were trying to desperately get pre-orders. And I signed hundreds of these things and I went a bit nuts. So you don't know who's going to end up getting them. He bought one that said, "I hope you like it and that one day we can meet in person." Isn't that weird? And now we have. Yeah, 6 years of shagging later, we've finally met.
You finally met. You finally looked at each other. You both pulled off the paper bag at the same time. Sorry.
Never apologise to me.
Nell Frizzell is a journalist. Hang on, I'll do it like this, and then it's yeah. I'll do it properly. Stop.
Lovely.
Right. Nell Frizzell is a journalist, writer, and Vogue columnist. She has written for The Guardian, Vice, The Telegraph, Grazia, and The Observer, among many others. Her first book, The Panic Years, is an exploration of bodies, babies, and the big questions facing modern life. She lives in Oxford, swims in the river as often as she can, and is appalling at opening her post.
Really quite pathologically bad at
Really?
opening the old post. Yeah.
Even if it's something fun. Is it because it's
I'm frightened of the post because it's always terrible, isn't it? It's always something you don't want to read. Okay, now I can read yours.
Yes.
Michelle Thomas is an author and presenter. Her book, My Therapist and Other Mental Health Stories, weaves her own experience of anxiety and depression with stories from a diverse selection of contributors. The book topped the Audible charts in April 2020, and she now hosts a podcast of the same name. Michelle lives in Bristol.
Thank you very much. That was lovely. Yours was better than mine.
No, I don't think so, because I haven't topped a chart. I haven't even middled a chart.
Well, no.
Nell middled the charts in terms of book sales so far, I think. I don't know.
But your book is excellent.
So is yours.
Thank you. And we are going to talk about Nell Frizzell and Michelle Thomas, the Empathetic Woman. We're going to talk. Join us.
I know that it sounds like collectively. So I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. We're going to weave our thoughts on self-compassion, womanhood, and how empathy is a muscle built by art. That sounds really interesting. Can't wait to hear what we're going to say about it.
I like that we've called it the Empathetic Woman, as if you put the two of us together, we might make up one empathetic woman.
One.
Left to our own devices, we're extremely patchy on the old empathy front, but as a team, we can feel all your feelings.
Yeah.
Can I start this like a year 7 English essay?
Yes, and I'm going to turn my phone off.
Lovely. I looked up empathy, the etymology thereof, not entomology because that's the study of insects. Yeah. And it comes from, and this is so obvious, em as in Greek for in, and pathos, feelings. So it literally means to be in feelings. Your feelings are other people's feelings. Isn't that so nice?
I love that.
So to empathize with someone is to literally be in their feelings.
That is fascinating.
Great. Isn't that great? Because to, not completely jump into our subject, but I do think, when we talk about mind reading and we say, like, God, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to read people's minds? I always want to say, we've got language. We can. That's why we have language. So we can speak to each other and we can write it down and then we can read each other's minds. We've already got it. The technology is already there for reading each other's minds. It's called language. And so when I think about how do you climb into another person's feelings, it's language, isn't it? It's writing in language. We can already do it. We don't need to do anything. There's no future fiction Margaret Atwood apparatus here. It's already there in language.
And it's about it's about valuing your thoughts and feelings enough to write them down and to communicate them, isn't it? And it's tricky now. It's not just as easy as, well, actually, guys, we've got these things called words.
Don't know if you know about them.
Don't know
We've
if you
come
know
to a
about
library
them,
event.
but I'm a writer, so no, it takes something to, first of all, properly identify your feelings, I think, and whatever it is that you're feeling, and then to kind of assign enough worth to them to write them down for yourself. And then you've got to show someone else you're writing. Who would do that? That's awful.
I mean, only a fool.
I know.
Only a fool would do that. Did you have to jump into your book, or via the medium of me? when I was trying to pitch the Panic Years, I remember saying to my own therapist, I just think, like, does anyone need this book? Like, does anyone need to hear what I've got to say about anything? I mean, honestly, anything. And he said, well, don't you find something from, like, don't you find, he wouldn't have said sucker, he's not that kind of person, don't you take comfort from reading other people's thoughts and feelings, even if they're similar to your own? It's like, yeah, actually, it's true. So that I only managed to build up to do exactly what you're describing, the self-worth to put your feelings into words and then show them to anyone, because I had a therapist who encouraged me to do so. Your experience of writing the book is different, though, isn't it? What was your motivation for doing that strange Spite and Malice, my favourite card game? Yeah, tell us more. What happened?
Quite genuinely and quite honestly, I pitched a book about body image. God, when was this? About 5 or 6, some years ago. And the publisher went, nah, you're all right, actually, but have you thought about writing a book about mental health? And I thought, no. And I had written a blog about mental health, and I had talked about my mental health because it was a really important, it was something that I was practicing. Talking about it was something that I was practicing because I was really frightened of it. I'd suffered a nervous breakdown. It's not fashionable to call them that anymore. You're supposed to call it a depressive episode. But I just started crying and couldn't stop. Which is,
I think we call that an attack of distemper, actually, now.
Oh, is it?
No,
my apologies.
Attack of distemper is one of those things that sort of horses and Victorian women were coming down with.
Oh, I love it. A vapors, a touch of the vapors, a little bit of the sads. A chronic case of the dead upsets. And so I was writing about it, and then so the publisher came to me and said, is this something that you'd consider writing about? And I went off and sulked and did it. So as much as I'd love to go, it was all me, it was all my idea, I am the best. No, it was something that I was asked to do. But then when I was actually writing it, and I thought about the same as you, like, what do I have to say that adds any sort of value to this conversation? And the thing that I could add was, I think, and I hope, speaking in my own voice, because that wasn't something that I read a lot at that time. When I was ill, I sort of researched and I read and I listened to and I watched everything that I could at that time, which was Stephen Fry's documentary about manic depression, Ruby Wax's book, and a book called Shoot the Damn Dog, and the NHS websites and Mind and this stuff, which was really, really important and great kind of forerunners to the stuff that we have now. But I did find that a lot of the time, apart from Ruby Wax, it was very, very dry, and it was very sort of, it was written in the way as to be as unprovocative as possible, and to make everything nice and safe and monotonous and flat line, and there were no kind of sudden moves or loud noises. And I found that really, really boring. And I found that really depressing, because that was the last thing I needed, was to you know, I had this condition which was so awful and so unimprovable that you couldn't even talk about it in a normal tone of voice. You have to get the hushed tones.
You had to put on your special sensitive adult voice.
Yes.
That's interesting, isn't it, when we think about empathy, that sensitivity and empathy, that's a tricky dance between the two things, because actually I don't like sensitivity as much as I like honesty, wit, humor and kindness. And I don't think that necessarily has to mean sensitivity. Who was who said apologies to anyone sensitive watching, but I can't remember who wrote that sensitivity is just another word for vain and touchy.
Oh, I like
good.
That.
And I'm sort of that mindset, actually, that like when you are feeling low, you want people to be kind, and you maybe want people, in my case, I wanted people to be kind and I wanted people to be funny because that's how they'd been before I was low. And I didn't want them to be too sensitive to my feelings and make me feel too sensitive of theirs. I wanted a bit more of that. Can we hear a bit from the book? Can you read us a bit from the book?
And I've suddenly thought, so I can see you and you can see me.
Oh, what's everyone else seeing?
What do people see? So do we need to go into some other?
No, because we're in gallery. I think if we're in gallery view, they see the two of us at once, don't they?
Hey, yeah, okay. So let's just, we might have to disregard the previous like 12 minutes of absolute bollocks, but we'll hope not. Not absolute bollocks. It's been sorry, I didn't mean absolute bollocks. I apologize. But we might have to do, should we do the intros again just in case?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do the reading and then we'll come back to the intros at the end. Okay. We'll just loop back. Should we have a reading from My Shit Therapist and Other Mental Health Stories? What shall I read? Talk amongst yourselves. Do. Haha. Okay. I like this. You know, I'm genuinely a little bit fond of this next bit. It was not an easy book to write. But I'm quite fond of this bit. I'm gonna let the cat in now because she's clawing at the door.
Okay.
You coming in? No?
Can I just say now that I have been for a long time wanting to write something about the social acceptability of pets versus small children in the social media world,
isn't it? Yeah.
Because I have so many friends who are like, oh my God, all my friends that so boring, they just post pictures of their children all day. And I inevitably look at their feed and it's all pictures of their cats. I want to say, why is it so much more social? Like, why is it so much more socially acceptable
to have a
pet that you lavish with like love and make a public spectacle than
with like an unholy amount of affection. It's weird. I don't like cats, but Caroline has sort of changed all that. And I have a lot of very genuine affection for her now. And I do post pictures of her in a way that I don't know.
Like, just even it's like our Rosetta Stone cliche of sort of social media is like funny cat videos. Funny baby videos never took off in the same way. Funny baby videos don't get shared around in the way that funny cat videos do. Why are we so much more
I don't know,
accepting of cats?
I love a funny
I've seen a few. They obviously exist. They exist in their millions, but it's not like, it isn't a phrase.
It's not a personality. You can say that you love cats, and you can say that you can say that all dogs are good boys. You can't say that all babies are good boys, because that's weird.
Well, you can't say I spent an hour watching funny baby videos online. but you can completely say I lost an hour watching funny cat videos online.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've got us off the topic. You were going to read a book.
No, I love
read a
that.
bit from your book.
Okay, I'll read a bit and then we'll come back. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. No, I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start here. Okay. Having depression doesn't mean I'm always depressed, in the same way that being allergic to bee stings doesn't mean a person is in constant anaphylactic shock. It's only when they get stung that it's a problem. Like a person who is prone to depression, a person with a bee sting allergy can get stung at any time. Their allergy is not dependent on their life circumstances. They could win the lottery, have the body of a South Korean athlete, and attend weekly murder mystery nights with Ruth Jones and Charlotte Church, and they'd still be allergic to bee stings. Their allergy isn't negated by terrible world events or the fact that there are many people worse off than them, and it's profoundly unhelpful to suggest that it is. Being allergic to bee stings doesn't make you a bad friend, a bad parent, or a bad employee. It isn't indulgent or selfish. It's a chemical anomaly. If an allergic person is stung by a bee, it's important they don't feel afraid or ashamed to get help. Treatments that may relieve the effects of a bee sting for a person who is not allergic to them, such as vinegar or spit on a dock leaf, are not effective to a person who is allergic to bee stings. Those allergic people need an EpiPen, and in some cases, professional medical attention. You can't snap out of an allergy, and a positive mental attitude, although helpful, is not an antidote. A person who is allergic to bee stings may encounter a bee and not get stung. For example, if a friend or colleague with the allergy fears they are at risk, they might say to you, "Hi, I'm allergic to bee stings, and there's a bee in my office. I'm going to close the window to prevent any more bees from coming in. I would also like to remove this enormous bouquet of flowers from my desk." And then you could say, "Sure thing, I'll put the bouquet in my office instead." If that person hasn't been stung for a while, that doesn't mean they're no longer allergic. Although they may take every precaution, no one is guaranteed lifelong bee sting evasion. However, no one should live in fear of their body's response to a chemical imbalance. By encouraging other people to talk openly about their allergies and educating others about what to do if they encounter someone having an allergic reaction, we can make our garden safer for everyone, and we can all enjoy some time in the sun.
It's very good. It's very good.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think that thing about how you might have to call on the people around you to create a more conducive or less dangerous atmosphere. That's an interesting example of where you cannot rely on empathy as a stand-in for communication and you cannot an action. You can't expect people to be psychic, even if they're very empathetic. And so there is because I was thinking about that. I was thinking if empathy means to be in another person's feelings, how do you achieve that? Do you I've just, not to drop a big one here, but I've just read Anna Karenina. And by read, I mean I listened to it on my headphones over months and months. Because it's 36 hours long. But in that novel, people are always sort of imagining themselves into the thoughts and feelings of other characters. And, because it's written about a particular time and a particular social class, so much of the action goes unsaid. And it's all this sort of inferred nuance of sort of strong feelings, but communicated through like a glance at a teacup or the way you stir your jam or whatever. And I think I really want to get on to talking about how we build empathy and what makes us empathetic people. But sort of it feels like in your book, quite a lot of the time you're saying you have feelings and you are also responsible for those feelings, or you need to care for those feelings. And I think that's another, brings us back to self-worth, I suppose. To care for your feelings means to think that you deserve to. What do you think? Is it have touch of the old, it's your problem and you need to sort it out, which is absolutely not what I mean.
No, I know what you mean. And I do think there's a delicate, there's definitely a balance between here are actions that you can take that will make you feel better. You know, you can, these are demonstrated theories and actions that are proven to boost your immune system and to boost your serotonin levels and your oxytocin and all that stuff. So you can go outside, you can hug a puppy, you can get some exercise, you can drink some water, you can get a good night's sleep. Those are like baby actions that you can take that are proven to genuinely improve your mood. However, that's not the same as saying, if you go for a nice walk, just go for a walk, mate, and just think about something else. And then, you know, the fact that you're earning minimum wage and you're barely covering your bills will just be negated. It will just, you know, that financial stress and that worry from a tangible external place will just go away. Just eat some greens. That's not the same thing, I don't think.
I love the spit on a dock leaf analogy of how it's not going to, what works for someone else is not going to necessarily work for you. And I think I have certainly suffered from that failure of empathy in thinking that what helped me should therefore help other people, or what I have found beneficial is universally beneficial, and that's a nonsense. But it's a sort of, is that created by myopia, like an inability to see beyond your own experience, or is it sort of, I don't know, is it narcissism to think that everyone should be like you, or is it just because you haven't exercised that muscle of trying to see the world from another person's perspective?
I think it's the latter. I think it's that, and I think it's because, I mean, mental health in particular is so poorly understood. And I think it's the easiest thing in the world to go, well, this is what I did, so why doesn't it work for you? Why do we do that? Why do we do that?
Because that is a failure of empathy, isn't it? To not understand that someone's internal life may be different to your own.
Is it a failure of empathy because you do think that you're feeling the same thing as the other person? Is it a failure of empathy, or is it a failure of compassion? Because compassion, I spoke to my therapist about this last week, and it was really interesting. He said that compassion is a two-part phenomenon. So first of all, compassion means that you're sensitive to someone else's hurt and someone else's discomfort and someone else's pain. But the second part is that you take action in order to relieve or alleviate that.
Right.
And I think that's what you were talking about earlier when you talked about sensitivity and empathy not being as important as action. And while I disagree with you about sensitivity, because I don't think sensitivity is something that can be turned up, but I'm biased because I'm a very sensitive person. I don't think I can turn it down. I think if you're someone who's been told, you know, you're not sensitive to the needs of others, that's a muscle that you can build, and that's something that you can cultivate in yourself. I think it's much harder when you are too sensitive, or when you're highly sensitive, to just dial it back a bit. Can you just think a bit less? Can you just feel a bit less? And again, maybe I'm just terribly biased.
Terribly. No, I think sensitivity is in and of itself a whole other discussion, isn't it? Because I often think by sensitivity there's a sensitivity to everybody's feelings and all stimuluses, and then there's a particular sensitivity to your own, and you can have one without the other, can't you? Like you can feel in sort of terribly vulnerable and possibly judged and hungry for the kindness or attention or understanding of people, but you don't necessarily communicate, you don't necessarily have that for other people. I think you have both, but we've all known people who are extremely sensitive, but not necessarily but who will walk past someone who is rough sleeping and it won't affect them. And that to me is that's insensitivity unless it's applied to your own life experience.
That's interesting. You so in your book, I think you write a lot about, it's not that you write about vulnerability, but I think you frame the way that you frame particular things in the way that you write about your sex life and about wanting a baby and about rejection. I think that, I don't want to say it comes from a vulnerable place, but I can, as someone who is outside looking in, I can go, oh, Nell's being really vulnerable here.
Well, it's so interesting. Yeah, I've had a lot of lovely feedback from people saying, my God, you've been so brave. You've been so brave. And I always think I had no other choice. Like that is, I could have lied. Of course I could have lied. And I could have acted like things were easier than they were. And I was a more sort of content, less thinking person. But then that person doesn't write a book, do you? Like if you found things, it would be such a dull book where someone just tells you about how nicely they slipped from one state to the other without any conflict or
there was no conflict,
self-reflection. That
there was no drama.
It'd be an entirely pointless book. But actually, this leads me on to the bit I was going to read from mine, which is the sex life, work, body issues, all of that stuff. I feel is like a taboo that other people before me have broken in, and it's very easily trodden ground now for me. The bit that I still get slightly nervous about is the early maternal experience, and I feel like I'll read the bit of the book, but I feel like the sort of the extending empathy to people who are in that state seems to be harder for people because we have such ingrained assumptions of what that should look like and how it should be expressed.
Please.
So this is a chapter, read along at home, called Slow Love. 2 weeks after I brought my son home, folded into a white snowsuit twice his size, my friend Hayley turned up on my doorstep with a packet of washable breast pads, a small knitted doll, a bar of chocolate, and a single sanitary towel tied up with a ribbon. She'd had her own baby 6 months earlier. Before we'd even walked the length of my hallway, she asked, "So, do you like him yet?" Pure relief flooded through my body like rain on a forest fire. She understood. She knew. She was asking me a question I could actually answer. "I think I like him," I said, "but I'm not sure that I love him yet." My tongue held fast in my mouth, a fox waiting for the sound of hounds. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe I'd just admitted something terrible. Maybe I was about to be put on some sort of list. "Love him," said Hayley, her face breaking open into a huge smile. "It's only been 2 weeks. You barely know him." In that moment, I would have given Hayley all my major organs and my record collection too. In the dead of night, as I'd listened to the soft gruntings of my tiny son and felt the volcanic adjustments in my body, I would turn to my partner, Nick, tears streaming down my face, my heart racing, and whisper, "I think I might love you more than the baby." I felt awful. I felt broken. I became terrified that I'd somehow accidentally misfired that initial rush of oxytocin, love, and infatuation onto Nick instead of my infant son. Like those ducklings that imprint on a goose or a wheelbarrow instead of their own mother. In the first few days of motherhood, I would find myself crying with gratitude at the thought of Nick's hands on my back during labour, or of his making me a cup of tea unasked. I would feel winded at the thought of this huge sacrifice I brought into his life, about how he would have had to bring up our son alone if I'd died in childbirth, about the way he'd held his son against his naked chest while I showered. I would find myself pouring with tears, remembering the days we'd spent walking through the Black Forest, drinking beer and eating hard cheese, the way he'd made me laugh on that first day in Calais, our first date in the Bethnal Green Travelodge, camping at the bottom of Snowdon when I was newly pregnant. Even as I breastfed my son, rocked him to sleep, kissed his forehead and watched his strange jerking arms as he slept, I would be thinking of Nick, of my mother, of Eliza, or of my friends. I loved them, adored them, knew their laughs and walks and ways of slicing bread. I'd shared my life with them, grown up with them, had wrapped their words around my bones to make me into a different person. I loved them because they were people with whom I could talk, share stories, laugh, and be surprised. But this person, this little twist of muscle and skin I called my son, he offered none of these things. Although he was physically present, somehow it felt like he hadn't yet arrived. His great glassy eyes were unseeing. His mind was unknowable. His soul, if such a thing exists, hung suspended elsewhere. I cared for his body, attended to his every need, felt wolfishly protective. But for the first 6 weeks, until he started to focus, smile, respond to my voice, have periods of waking that were not filled with howling anguish, I found it hard to know him, let alone love him. And I picked that bit because I was thinking about, there's two examples of what I maybe wrongly think calling empathy there. One is Hayley's empathy towards me, that she understood without me she understood she could be in my feelings of not feeling totally settled into this idealized sort of nappy advert infatuation with a newborn child. Then there's also my very complicated struggle to empathize with a being that really didn't feel there yet. Like they really didn't feel like they'd arrived. There was like this sort of paroxysm of anguish, this sort of twisted little weeping muscle that I had to care for. But I couldn't really get into his feelings. I mean, it was either they were too intense and I couldn't bear them, or they were too unformed and I couldn't understand them. And I think it's something, he's now 3.5, and the acquisition of language and my ability to empathize with him is so interrelated, and I don't want to sound like I'm some like Jacob Rees-Mogg, like cerebral idiot that can only communicate with people verbally. Like, of course, if he falls over and cries, I understand that he might have hurt himself. Of course. But a lot of the time, there's a real mystery about how he's feeling as a small, not fluent child.
That's really interesting. And is your partner as mysterious to you? Is it easy for you to empathize with a human adult?
I make a lot of assumptions. I think I assume I can understand my partner, and I might be completely wrong on all counts about how I interpret his behavior, but it's easier to interpret than my son's. Also because, and I don't know if other people would agree with this, but a lot of because they are so dependent on you for so long, a lot of those feelings feel like judgments on you, and therefore they are quite hard to take. Like if he is upset, it feels like he's angry with me, and I feel impotent, and then I feel frustrated because I feel impotent, and it goes back and forth like that. It's a very complicated relationship, I think, and obviously for some people not, or they're too mealy-mouthed to admit it. It's a life's work to try and discover which it is.
And so in terms of the acquisition of language, bonding over that, has art helped you empathize?
Well,
with your
I'm
sons?
so glad you brought this up, because this is my sort of big thesis about empathy, which I think is simultaneously incredibly obvious and largely ignored or misunderstood, particularly by the people who are in power at the moment, which is that I think empathy, if we take it to mean the ability to be in the feelings of another person, a lot of how we learn that is through storytelling, like listening to and reading other stories. Because even Spot the dog, you are asked to imagine yourself into the position of Spot's mums, who is called Sally, I now know, who's trying to find Spot. And so you are, even as a 1-year-old, expected to empathize with this dog's mum who's lost their baby, and that they might be worried and they might be sad and they might be cross with Spot when he turns up. And you go from door to door and knock on it. And that's a picture book. There's maybe 10 words in that book, but it's already teaching a small child empathy. And then you scale that up and you read, you know, a big novel, and you are expected to climb into the feelings of 20, 30 people, maybe from a different historical time or different class, who have a different religious background to you, who have a different physicality to you, who have a different sexuality or gender identity, or all of these things. And that is, it's like the training ground in order to be able to do that in real life. And so I think without arts, without particularly reading and listening to stories, but then also, you know, television and plays and films and things, even the lyrics of songs, you are sort of required as the audience of that work to exercise your empathetic muscle in order to appreciate it. And so when we have a government that routinely and for decades underfunds the arts, that's because it's not just because they don't value it, because financially they should value it. It makes loads of money, like the arts is worth doing. But I think it's because I think a lot of people, because of the way that they're brought up and the sort of the values that are instilled in them, don't think that empathy is that important, and they haven't paid attention to the arts and they haven't exercised that muscle. And so they've lost it. They've sort of lost that thing that Spot the dog was trying to teach them 50 years ago, which is to think, actually, what does the world look like from someone else's perspective? And is that bad? And therefore, could I make it better? Which is sort of where compassion comes in. So I think, yeah, like more arts leads to a healthier nation. And for that simple reason, that you learn to see the world from other people's points of view.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I agree with
I don't know, where did you learn empathy? Because you obviously have it. You're an interviewer, you're a writer. Where did you learn how to do that?
I think it's partly from being bullied, I think, and sort of thinking, okay, I don't like this, I probably won't do that to anyone else. And when you are sort of picked on, you become very sensitive to the needs of other people so that you can ingratiate yourself with them, so that you then don't become a target.
Right.
So it's all self-preservation. It's not niceness or that, or maybe that's the version of sensitivity that you were talking about, when it's all about self-protection and self-preservation. But I think, definitely, empathy as an escape, I think was more for me with books when I was growing up, because I remember the gingerbread man. And I remember how the fox helped him cross the river, and he stood on the fox's head because he was getting wet, because he was stood on the fox's back and he was getting wet, and the fox went, "Oh, come up onto my head," and he was still getting wet, and he went, "Oh, come up onto the tip of my nose," and then the fox snapped the gingerbread man up in one big bite.
And you empathized with the gingerbread man, did you there?
I did. Well, I don't know who I empathized with, but I loved that it was the adventure and the escape, and the sort of the protagonist died. The protagonist was brutally murdered in the first.
That's more than mild peril, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think for me, the thing that I use books and art for is to particularly when I was ill and when I was very depressed, I think the cruelest thing about depression is that it just murders your concentration so that you can't read, just when you need that nourishment the most. It strips it away. But reading poetry, excuse me, a bit of hummus came up. So sorry. Reading poetry, reading graphic novels, reading about people who have sort of lived through what I'm going through now, that gave me some comfort. That offered me escape, and it also offered me reassurance and comfort that things would get better, and it gave me somewhere else to put my brain.
Right.
It gave me something else to focus my attention on, and that's what really helped me. And I think that the makers and the authors and the creators of art, I think you do it because I do think it has to be a generous act. I do think it has to be something that you're sharing, at least in some ways, for the benefit of other people. Otherwise, because it takes ages, doesn't it? And it's massive. 60,000 words in a book takes ages to write, and it's loads and loads of words. You can't do that unless you genuinely give a shit, I don't think.
It's interesting there, because there's a sort of, it's been a long time since I read The Prince, but I think there is a Machiavellian side of me that also can say empathy makes you a great manipulator. If you can imagine yourself into the feelings of other people, you can be much more powerful. I wanted to talk to you actually about, we're talking about the empathetic woman, and I wanted to talk to you about empathy and status. That what does it mean for our status as women to be empathetic? Why is it, I feel, and you may completely disagree, I feel like there is an expectation that the very baseline of being a woman, and that's either a cisgendered woman or someone who identifies as a woman, is empathy. That you are expected to just operate with empathy in a way that we don't expect it of men. We just expect women to understand and communicate understand the feelings of other people and be able to communicate with them about those feelings.
And act accordingly.
Yeah, but just to even understand, like that kind of feeling of like, to give a really gross example, I've known so many friends who will phone home a landline because they're feeling something, and their father will put their mum on the phone because to have that. It's like, oh, you have a lock. Oh, your mum's got a key. I don't have a key. I can't unlock this. I don't know whether that, maybe this is grossly outdated ramblings of an old millennial, but I feel like there was this sort of feeling that women were more nurturing and were more emotionally mature and had a better emotional vocabulary, and that was somehow innate, that like up in your vaginal cavity there was a kind of empathetic organ.
There's an empathy button
to do it.
That the baby hits on the way out, and just floods you with empathy. I think women are generally seen as being more emotionally available than men, and that's a really and you're right, it's the expectation of do this labor for me, make me feel good, I feel bad, make me feel good. And that's something that is expected of women more than men. Definitely.
I just listened to a really interesting interview, sorry to talk over you, with a woman who was saying the old argument about, are women funny, that women have for centuries been observers, so of course they're very good at observational comedy. And it takes you back to that kind of Agatha Christie. Like Agatha Christie could have been a great criminal because she had the empathetic power and observational power to understand why people behaved in the way that they did. And so it's not always benevolent. I don't think it is always a good thing. I think it can be. I think you can be empathetic and probably narcissistic and power hungry and use that empathy in order to have personal gain.
Definitely.
I sure do. No.
Definitely.
I'm gonna.
I think, oh yeah, but when men, I mean, that's what, you know, the great Machiavellian figures, I mean, like, what was his name in Game of Thrones? Littlefinger. You just know things. You know everything about everyone because people tell you things.
And in Wolf Hall, like Cromwell is he's such an empathetic person. But he is also like cold and pragmatic enough to turn off. You can feel the feelings of someone else or predict them, but you can also flush them away if they don't serve your ends.
I think the thing about empathy and the thing about women and empathy and men and empathy, I think, is that the idea is that you can, if you speak to a woman and you tell a woman that you have a problem, she will say, that's terrible, tell me all about it, get it off your chest, that's awful, I feel really sorry for you, what can I do, I'll feel really sorry for you. If you tell a man your problems, he will say, all right, this is how you fix it, this is what you do. I think men are typically seen as fixers, and if there's an action-based people, if there's a thing that needs to be done, then you ask a man to do it. If you need to sit in your feelings,
you're taking me right back to my childhood and my parents' copy of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Absolutely.
Have you ever read that book?
No, I haven't.
It's like, as a historical artifact, it's so interesting, but also very of its era.
Of course, when I say I think this, I don't actually believe that myself. I think it's a cultural caveat. I think it's the cultural leaning that we had, that informed us when we were growing up.
Yeah,
I think the younglings now are a bit wiser.
Can I ask you a question? Do you still take SSRIs?
Yes, I take citalopram 20 milligrams every day.
And do you think, so you are altering your brain chemistry? Did you ever wonder about whether that would affect your ability to climb into the feelings of other people?
To feel, yes, of course. Because I thought they'd turn me into a zombie. I thought they'd level me out. I thought I wouldn't get the lows anymore, but I wouldn't get the highs either. I thought I'd just live in this really letterboxy state. And there are some drugs that do that. And for some people, that is preferable to feeling suicidal. And that is a real thing. But for me, it wasn't a worry, because because I was feeling too much. I was feeling a disproportionate amount about everything all the time, and it was exhausting. So no, the medication helped me in a really noticeable way. So the empathy as well, the double-edged sword of empathy is the pejorative thoughts, and is projecting the horrible thoughts that you have about yourself onto other people. They're judging me, they think I'm terrible, none of my friends want to talk to me, they're all hanging out without me, and all that kind of stuff. But there's a specific example that I write about in the book. At the time, I worked in a cafe, so I had a 6 a.m. start, and I had to get up at 5:30. And one day I slept in, and my boss rang me at 6:10 saying, where are you? The cafe's opening. And I lived just around the corner, so I dashed out of bed, got everything sorted, set myself up, and opened the shutters. And I was still open by 6:30, which was the time I was supposed to be open anyway. And I got through my shift, and it wasn't until sort of 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock at the end of my shift that I went, Oh, so I made a mistake this morning, but I haven't thought about it since then. I haven't spent the day going, oh my God, I'm going to get sacked. My boss hates me. It's terrible. Why did I do that? I'm such a shit person? The absence of those thoughts and that spiral of self-loathing was noticeable. And that's what the medication did for me. And it wasn't, and I don't think that's impacted my ability to empathize. I think it's made me possibly less self-absorbed, because all of those thoughts are about me and how terrible I am.
Yeah.
While actually the drugs just sort of remove that.
I like that we've just gone from I was so self-critical that, and then you've said, which was really self-absorbed of me, more self-criticism. So hard to climb out of self-criticism, isn't it?
It really is,
because it so often feels like self-awareness.
Yeah, and it's really
I tell myself
boring. It's just the same thoughts all the time.
Yeah, and it's so boring for everyone around you to have to feel those. One thing we haven't talked about, and I haven't even done my year 7 essay of looking this up, but what would you say was the difference between sympathy and empathy?
Oh, that's really interesting. And this is something that I talked about with someone earlier this week. I think sympathy is, and I might be wrong about this because I feel like everyone gets these things wrong all the time, so I think it's all right. And there's people who'll be going, no. I think empathy is you're in the feelings with the person. So you're feeling this thing. I am going to climb into those feelings and sit with you in them. I think sympathy is saying, you're feeling this feeling. I have felt that in the past. I know what that's like, but I'm not in there with you. I'm not in the arena having the same fight.
Can I tell you what I think?
Yes.
And I think this may have come from my mum, I am agreeing with you, but I think her definition of difference between sympathy and empathy is sympathy is standing on a ledge looking at someone in a hole full of shit saying, God, it looks bad in that hole full of shit. And empathy is climbing down into the hole full of shit with them and saying, it's horrible down here, isn't it?
That's interesting. And compassion,
and that there's no loss of state. It's getting them out.
Compassion is saying that
there's no loss
shit and getting a rope and getting them out. But there's no sorry, you were saying.
I was going to say there's no loss of status in sympathy. Sympathy is retaining your status while saying this, and and by status I don't mean it's always positive and you're punching down. Sometimes your sympathy can be evoked by someone who is, I guess it is always a negative experience, but that person might have a greater level of privilege, but you can still feel sympathetic towards them because they're suffering in some level. It's not always, sympathy is not always a kind of looking at someone with less status than you and feeling sorry for them. I think it is just feeling sorry for someone who's in a different state to you.
That's interesting. Why do you think we sympathize with someone when someone's died? Because that's the most popular use of the word, I would say.
Yes, deepest sympathy.
In the sympathy. In deepest.
Because I suppose you can't always claim
empathy.
I mean, there would be a range of cards for people who have also lost their brothers that would say in empathy, and you would only be allowed to send it to people if you have experienced the same grief. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? But then you think about sympathy I've talked about empathy as a sort of creative and as a muscle that has to be exercised through the sort of exposure to stories and other people's stories and to identify yourself in them. I also think of empathy as a creative, active imagination. You won't have because you're a sensible person, but when I was a young girl, read Longfellow's book Hiawatha, which is this really long, like, verse poem about Native American, like Indigenous Americans, and the sort of the landscape before white Europeans arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, it's full of all this incredible detail. And what's his name? Henry Longfellow? Anyway, never set foot in America, never went. But it's this like amazing, and I don't know if that is that an imagination or is it empathy, because he's sort of like creating the feelings of Hiawatha, this sort of mythical warrior figure, and imbuing that person with all the humanity that he sees among the white Europeans that Longfellow lived with. But it's all totally made up. And I'm sort of interested in that, you know, as a not, if you write fiction, is that an act of empathy or is that an act of imagination? If I write about someone who, to go back to the example of my book, if I write about someone having a man having a baby and how that might feel, to watch your partner give birth and to watch them stay up in the middle of the night crying because they're worried that they haven't bonded with their baby, is that an act of empathy or is that an act of imagination?
That's interesting, because I think it's different depending on, if I wrote about a man worrying about his partner who'd had a baby, I would say that was an act of imagination.
Right.
In your case, because you were writing about the man you love, I think that was an act of empathy and an act of love, because you're documenting what he did for you.
It's interesting, isn't it, then? Empathy is sort of both imaginative, in some way interrelated with memory. It touches on language. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. It is something, it is aligned to, but not the same as, sensitivity and sympathy and compassion. It's an interesting starting point, isn't it?
Are you an empath?
No.
And what do you think when you hear someone say that they are an empath? And I've just seen this online and I find it really interesting. I
used to say, I mean, grammatically, I like it, calling yourself an empath, because I used to call myself a neurot, i.e. someone who's neurotic.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm from a long line of neurots, and I am myself a neurot. So to be, I don't know, an empath, this is such a lowbrow reference, but did you ever watch What We Do in the Shadows, the TV series?
I fucking love What We Do in the Shadows.
Do you remember the emotional vampire?
And he's having a standoff with the other emotional vampire.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That female, I mean, we're going to talk about the empathetic woman, that female emotional vampire, for me, when someone says they're an empath, I have like a little warning light goes off in my head, like, oh my God, are you gonna feed off my feelings? Are you gonna not suck out my feelings, there's enough to go around, but you're gonna like drink in my feelings and be like satiated by my feelings? Because that's, you know, we've all known those, or maybe we haven't. I have known those people who are so caring and they're so attentive, but it's quite a strain. The direction of travel is always you revealing yourself to them, and it doesn't come back in return.
It's like having a trauma bath.
Yes, it
and
is.
They're running it and they're just pouring it over you.
What do you think when you see the word empath? And I assume we're talking about on social media here.
Yeah, because I see people go, I'm an empath. And I should have had an answer ready for this, but I don't.
No.
I wonder if it's the same as, I think it's the same. It's the labeling of the self, isn't it? It's the fascination. It's the same argument as the sort of introvert, extrovert. What's your Myers-Briggs horoscope thing? Yeah. But
just
the
17
empath,
quizzes.
the empath thing, just 17 quizzes and Sugar magazine. The empath thing is particular because it's kind of signposting that you're a good person. I think if you're, but then I don't know. Is it signposting? I don't know. I'm really sorry. We're gonna have to delete all of this because from when you asked me the question back,
No.
I liked it when I asked you the question and then you answered in a really articulate way.
No,
I didn't like it when you asked me the question and I started panicking.
No, I don't think you did panic. I don't think that's true.
Thanks.
I don't think you panicked. I'm going to tell you how you felt. I'm going to tell you your feelings right back.
Tell me my feelings, you emotional vampire.
This is my big question. I've got
yes.
a last question for you before we do our introductions.
Yes.
In writing the book or elsewhere in your career and life, have you ever come across someone that you couldn't empathize with? It was too the gap between you was too large, or their repression was so great, or was there something that just a failure to empathize with another person?
Oh yeah. And I think you always,
like in writing the book, did you have people where you were like, I can't put this in because I can't do it?
Not in writing the book, I don't think. Even though like there were stories and there were circumstances that made me go, I cannot imagine that being my life. And I can't imagine how painful that would be. But no, in life, I think it's hard to empathize with someone. It's hard to empathize with someone who makes you feel aware of your own shortcomings. So yes. Maybe there's
yes.
I'm jealous. I get jealous, and I'm quite, and I wish I weren't, I'm quite possessive of my work. Like, this is my thing. This is my thing that I do. And you can't have any because it's for me. And that's not true. And I think in jobs that I've had, not writing, but in jobs that I've had, if there's been a person who is of a similar level to me, if you don't like them, if you're not friends with them immediately, then you can see where the cracks in that relationship could form. And you can feel like tiny little lightning strikes of resentment, or of bitterness, or of gloating when they've got something wrong. And I think in that instance, it's really hard. What would help would be empathy in that situation. But I can't do it. I just nurse my horrible little pet resentment like a horrible evil little Tamagotchi, and I just nurse it and feed it and let it take over until that relationship is unfixable.
It is interesting though, it does sometimes just take another person saying to you, have you tried imagining it from their point of view, to sort of re-engage your empathy. Like, it's quick to, like all exercise, it's slow to gain and quick to lose. If you haven't, I had this with my dad the other day. He was describing a parental relationship between two people I don't know. And he was just saying, their dad is just always really critical and mean to them. He's just a really mean person. And I said, or their dad has really low self-esteem and is really sort of unsure of himself, and so feels really threatened by his child's success. And my dad was like, oh my God, I've never thought about it like that. And I was like, that's because you've never tried, you've imagined, you've had the empathetic feeling of you've empathized with your friend, but you haven't tried to empathize with the other person in this scenario to work out why they might be doing what they're doing,
No one could ring you to just have a good bitch, could they? Because you
me, oh god,
the
yeah.
one going,
No.
have you tried looking at it from their point of view?
No, I will. I'm very happy to do that with anyone other than my mum, and then I'm really cruel because I just don't. I'm always like, it gives me a horrible, like scratching a mosquito bite pleasure to make my mum feel unempathetic. My mum is such a kind, sensitive, gentle, well-meaning person, and I love to make out that she's just being really self-absorbed and horrible. It's awful. So if she's ever, she'll say like, oh, such and such has had this terrible time, and I'll say, but have you thought about why they might be doing it, or how other people are feeling, or like maybe that really upset them when they did that? And I'm like, come on, I can do it more than you. That's what I mean about empathy actually sometimes being quite an unpleasant manipulative tool.
Oh, definitely manipulative. And I think for me, I think because I so with the book I put a call out for stories, and I think with the podcast that I'm doing, I just, you've been on, the only question is, what's the best and worst thing a therapist has ever said to you? And I really listen.
Yes,
and I think the flip side of that is I'm gaining this information and I've got it on you, and as much as it's not my intention, of course, to use that information for harm, the idea that I am eliciting this response from people where they're exposing their soft little underbellies because I've done the same thing could be genuinely quite thrilling.
Yeah.
If I were that kind of person, which I don't think I am. But I'm very aware that it's that same, it's the same.
I don't think you are. I don't think you're that person at all. But
I think
I would be really interested to read your fiction to see if you like what you would do with all of those stories if you weren't under the sort of code of morality that means you have to look after that person. I think it's all made up.
I think it's the same sort of coin as sentimentality and cruelty. Like with the cat, I'll be stroking her and like kissing her and going, oh, look how tiny you are, look at your tiny little crushable skull. And it's you're very close to then going, I could just crush it with my hands. And I think sentimentality and cruelty are sort of,
because you have to flatten out the other
empathy and manipulation.
Yeah, you have to flatten out the other person's humanity in order to be sentimental about them. We all know, we've all been feeling sentimental about a friend or an ex-boyfriend or a parent or a grandparent, and have phoned them up and then they say, oh, my Hoover's broken, and you're like, oh, this is not the sort of schmaltzy technicolor pastel beautiful sort of sentimental interaction I was hoping for. This is you as a real person, and that involves you being boring or annoying or self-absorbed or mundane or all of those things. I fall for it all the time. My sort of sentimentality overwhelms me, and then I'm cruelly brought down to earth by someone telling me about how they're stacking their dishwasher, and I think, oh god,
what have I wrong you?
We've talked for a while, haven't we?
Yes. Should we do
final
the introductions
thoughts
again?
I was going to just say final thoughts on the Empathetic Woman. I think you've made me think about, I had not, because I am very lucky to have largely not had that experience of how being someone who is being picked upon or subjugated or ridiculed, how that would affect your understanding and nurturing of empathy. I'd never thought about that, and it's really interesting to think about that, because I see it as this sort of interesting status power game, empathy, and you are looking at it from the other end of the telescope, I think.
I really love your idea about empathy as a tool for manipulation. And in terms, no, but genuinely, in terms of the empathetic woman, I think empathy in men is seen as being quite shrewd and quite calculating. I think empathy in women is seen as being soft and nurturing and lovely.
That's interesting, isn't it? Brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for asking me.
I love it. Thank you. I'm going to read your introduction again.
Okay.
Hit
me with who I am.
Hit me with your best shot. Do you want to hold up your book?
Yes.
Okay. You ready? Nell Frizzell is a journalist, writer, and Vogue columnist. She has written for The Guardian, Vice, The Telegraph, Grazia, and The Observer, among many others. Her first book, The Panic Years, is an exploration of bodies, babies, and the big questions facing modern life. She lives in Oxford, swims in rivers as often as she can, and is appalling at opening her post.
Appalling. Absolutely appalling. Sort of pathological. My partner says it's like snow blindness. It arrives and it's like I can't see it because I don't want to open it because I'm scared of what it will say. I'm going to read yours now.
Okay.
So you can hold up yours. The ours would be very nice in a display together, I think.
They would. Make them kiss each
other. Michelle Thomas is an author and presenter. Her book, Therapist and Other Mental Health Stories, weaves her own experience of anxiety and depression with stories from a diverse selection of contributors. The book topped the Audible charts in April 2020, and she now hosts a podcast of the same name. Michelle lives in Bristol. We're actually not very physically far away from each other. We could get on a megabus. We could have done this on the megabus. That's what we should have done.
Well, that's exactly what we should have done.
That's what we pitched.
National Express. That is what we pitched.
The original title was The Empathetic Woman on a Megabus.
And then now Cooper said no.
Somehow the email got cut off and they've ended up with this.
Ended up with just The Empathetic Woman. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.
Lovely.
And then we can